Alternative Ways to Organize Your Essay, Part 2. And we're back. Now, let's move on to persuasive or argumentative writing. Number 12, building blocks, is your basic form. The 5-paragraph essay is one variation on this form. Here you make a claim, also known as a thesis or assertion, maybe that our city must invest in light rail mass transit now. Next, give a little context. Explain to your reader why this is an urgent issue we'd better get on top of, because if we don't, there will be some dire consequences. After that, you build your argument like building blocks, one on top of the other. Follow this with a description of what someone who disagrees with you would say, and then respectfully demolish that person's argument with your own rock-solid reasoning. Then, just to keep it interesting, you could finish with a prediction of 2 futures, one in which wise leaders have followed your advice and everything is grand, and another one in which your advice was disregarded and everything is in the toilet. 13 is exemplification, which is just a $10 word meaning showing or illustrating with examples. In they say, I say fashion, you could write, some people believe blah blah blah, but I argue yada yada instead. Let's say your yada yada is that global climate change is a danger to all living things on Earth, including us. To back up that claim, you give maybe 2 major supporting examples, the ones that will really make an impression. In another paragraph, you could quickly summarize, in what is essentially a list, a few other terrible consequences of climate change. You could follow that with a prediction of a hypothetical world in which global climate change is successfully addressed and what that might look like. And just like you do with all of these examples, you'd follow that with a strong conclusion. The call to action conclusion is a good way to go for this one. Number 14 is an analysis of multiple items. Let's say you were asked to analyze 3 major characters in a play, say Death of a Salesman. First, you could make a general statement about the play's characters, maybe how they're all very different, or how they're all part of a certain social culture, products of their time and place. You then write about each character one by one, and at each step, you compare the character you're currently writing about with the ones you previously wrote about. You'd explain what kind of people they are and why they do what they do. Finally, you'd argue that the playwright deliberately constructed these characters to function in a certain way in the story, to create a certain effect of some kind, whatever that might be. Okay, number 15, candidate comparison. Like number 7 and a little like 14, this kind of essay compares 2 things, but in this one, you compare 2 political candidates and argue at the end that one of them is superior to the other one. Pretty straightforward. I see 2 obvious approaches, but there could be a dozen other ways to go with this. In Model 15A, you look at 3 separate issues, one at a time, comparing the positions of candidates Azure and Brown on each issue. So the first 2 paragraphs are about taxes, the second pair is about civil rights, and the last 2 are about immigration. In 15B, you turn that around and talk about one candidate and his positions on all 3 issues, and then the second candidate and her positions on the same 3 issues, comparing the 2 candidates' positions as you go. Both of those models end with an analysis of the 2 candidates' ideas and then advocating for one over the other. I imagine that analysis section would take multiple paragraphs to be thorough. 16. Unfolding theme is a little different. You know how when you're reading a long-form narrative like a novel, the theme changes at different stages of the book? This approach allows you to describe that. You begin with a statement of theme, and if you aren't sure what theme is, take a look at my video called How to Find a Theme. Then, in each paragraph, you write about a section of the plot and what theme is suggested at each stage, finishing with your thoughts about what the overall theme is. You'd probably want to go chronologically. 17 is contrasting relationships. Here I imagine writing about a novel like The Color Purple. In this model, you don't begin with a statement of theme as you traditionally would. If you were writing about Celie in The Color Purple, you might want to start by summarizing what someone else in class said about some important plot point, and then pointing out that events are important because of who they happen to and how they affect the relationships between them. Next, talk about the differences in Seeley's relationship with the adult men, like Mr. and his father, and the female characters, Shug, Sophia, and Nettie. And finally, with the children, like Harpo, gradually developing a picture of the theme as you go. Finally, you can bring it all together at the end, explaining what those relationships mean, how they suggest a theme. I'll call it 18 a point-by-point rebuttal of a series of counter-arguments. My model for this is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous and eloquent Letter from Birmingham Jail. A group of clergymen had published a letter objecting to his protests in Birmingham, Alabama. In response, Dr. King opens his letter with a greeting and a statement of his intentions. Next, he respectfully addresses the objections of those clergymen one by one. The restatement of the counter-arguments aren't very long. His devastating rebuttals are well supported and fully developed with examples and reasoning. After repeating this process a few times, Dr. King moves into explaining his position fully, again supporting all his assertions with evidence and explanations. He addresses one more counter-argument, then closes by reaching out to his reader, not as an enemy, but as a potential ally, looking for common ground on an elevated moral plane. If you haven't read it, you really should. It's amazing. Next, narrative forms. 19 is relating an event. I'm imagining a chronology, like the unfolding events of September 11th, 2001. You might begin with a short overview of what happened that day. That's context, so your reader is reminded of what you're talking about. The next paragraph could be about the different groups of people involved in the event, like the terrorists, the American intelligence community, and the first responders. You would probably want to write about each event in the order in which it happened. Just imagine that the third box there represents 4 separate boxes, one for each event. Don't go into microscopic detail unless you want to write a book. Choose key moments, key events, the last of which is the aftermath of the attacks and how they affected and continued to affect people and systems like laws and security procedures. You could follow that with an analysis of why it happened and missed opportunities to have avoided it. Finally, in a call to action sort of conclusion, you could talk about what should happen now to balance safety with freedom to go about our daily lives. Just a reminder, all of these models should begin with some kind of hook and end with a conclusion. Number 20 is what I call hindsight. For this one, I thought about an incredible memoir I read by Scott Russell Sanders about his father's alcoholism. You might start with an early memory of something. You don't have anything to compare it to, so it doesn't mean anything to you. But then it happens again, and although you don't talk about it, you notice it. So in each paragraph or section, you write about what you thought at that time. It happens again, and you start to really understand what's going on. You write about that. It happens yet again, recently, and you come to a more mature understanding of this thing, whatever it is, because you're older now and more experienced with this thing. In Sanders' essay, he then wrote about how that knowledge altered the way he saw himself and why he is the way he is. And finally, you could talk about how you want to live your life, how you want to go forward, given this new understanding. The next narrative form, 21, is the memoir thread. In this one, you talk about some topic that has been relevant to your entire life so far, something that impacts you now and when you were little. Let's say you wanted to write about lies you've been told and how those lies have affected you. You introduce that topic in an early paragraph after, I imagine, a really compelling personal experience hook. Then you talk about 3 important times in your life when you were lied to and what each of those instances meant to you. Maybe not all of them were negative. Maybe some came from a place of love or compassion. Then, after writing about the three lies, you could analyze what each of them revealed to you about people or the world we live in. You interpret those experiences so your reader can draw from them a new lens for looking at the nature of honesty and dishonesty. The next 5 I'll go through quickly because they aren't mine. They were observed and pointed out by an extraordinary teacher named Cornelius Minor, who is affiliated with Columbia Teachers College. He has a popular Twitter feed too, at Mr. Minor. Mr. Minor looked at specific writers and took note of organizational structures that he'd seen in their writing. I won't try to explain them as well as he does. Number 22. In Malcolm Gladwell's writing, I think Mr. Minor said Gladwell tells a string of anecdotes and only gets to the theme, the principle that they all have in common, at the very end. My notes on the Gladwell model are a little vague, but I know he said Gladwell doesn't get to the point until the end, and he said some of Gladwell's readers found this frustrating, while others think Gladwell is brilliant. 23. Alice Walker begins with a big claim or claims about life, so she starts with a wide-angle lens. To support that claim, she summarizes a story, or the story she's writing about, finds evidence in there of how the story supports her claims, then closes by restating the claim. 24. Minor noticed that Oprah Winfrey also opens with a claim, an assertion of some kind. Then she explains why that thing is good or important. She then writes about some things that aren't so good, a concession. Finally, she explains why the good outweighs the bad. 25. Manohla Dargis is a film critic for the New York Times, so this is a good template to follow for writing a review. It doesn't have to be a movie review, it can be a book or something else. She opens the review with a summary, a description of the movie's plot, being careful not to spoil the ending. Then she describes the top 2 things you need to know about the movie. Finally, she ends with what Minor calls an action clause, which I guess is her telling the reader to go see or not to go see the movie. But it's basically a conclusion, giving her bottom-line judgment about the movie as a whole. Last, 26. Gordon Ramsay is a famous chef you may have seen on TV. Minor says that when Ramsay is writing about a book, he opens by grabbing your attention by telling you the most shocking thing from the book. Then he explains why that shocking thing is important. He gives an example from the book, another example from life, and closes with an explanation of why people should believe these ideas. So don't be nervous or uncertain leaving the safety of the 5-paragraph essay. In fact, you should get up and dance because you've been given the freedom to, within reasonable boundaries, say what you want in whatever form best suits your content. This is what freedom feels like. These models are just an appetizer, like a sampler plate at a restaurant. You've probably already gotten ideas about how to improve on these, and that's great. Here's the time index for the 26 models. There are an infinite number of ways to express something worth expressing, and each of them can be organized differently from another essay, article, blog, report, review, or whatever on the same topic. My hope is that this video gives you some idea of the different kinds of things you can say in your writing, not just supporting evidence, but context, counterarguments, analysis, predictions, speculation, summaries of contrasting viewpoints, detailed descriptions of all the little parts of a thing, as well as a huge abstract generalization about something else, or a string of connectedness of your topic to another thing and to another and another and so on. It's like you're putting together a menu. You don't necessarily have to serve exactly 1 meat, 1 starch, and 1 vegetable, like in a school cafeteria. You can combine whatever works well on your plate, as long as the final result is beneficial and satisfying to your reader. But don't get overwhelmed by the multiplicity of choices. Think about your topic first. Think. Your writing is just a record of your thought process. If you are trying not to actually think, and you know who you are, your task just got 10 times harder. So, in the words of the great Winnie the Pooh, think, think, think. And when you've thought yourself to an interesting destination, ask yourself, what were the stopping points on your train of thought? That's how you should organize your writing. And don't forget, you can always hang on to the basic principle that all good writing, no matter if it's a dramatic monologue, a manga, or a thank you note, still has a beginning that introduces your ideas, a middle where you develop those ideas, and an end that has that thump of finality and conveys to your readers why they should care. Okay, well, good luck with your thinking, and then with your writing. All right, go get 'em.